He came out of the fog like a shadow made flesh, limping, frostbitten, and soaked in old blood that wasn't his own. No badge, no handler, no home. Just one purpose still burning behind those amber eyes. The German shepherd stopped at the edge of the abandoned hospital, turned once toward the town that forgot him, and vanished through the broken door as if answering a call no human could hear. He wasn't looking to be rescued. He was leading someone back. What unfolded beneath the crumbling halls of Ash Grove General would uncover.
Ash Grove, Montana, once a bustling mining town with warm cafes and Friday night parades, now felt like a ghost hunched beneath an endless sky. The first snow of November had fallen heavy that morning, blanketing the hills and hollow streets in white silence. The wind carried the smell of ash and pine, a bitter reminder of the hospital fire 25 years ago, the one no one dared to speak of, except in whispers behind closed doors. Detective Nora Caldwell stood alone beside her cruiser, her boots half buried in snow. She was tall, with a sharp silhouette softened only by the worn olive trench coat cinched at her waist. Her dark brown hair was tied back in a low knot beneath a gray knit beanie, and her pale face bore the lines of both wind and memory. She had eyes that had once been quick to smile, but now settled more often in study, gray with hints of blue, clouded at the edges. Nora had spent 15 years chasing answers, but one mystery haunted her most: the disappearance of her younger sister, Emily, a nursing student who vanished after a shift at Ash Grove General Hospital just weeks before the fire. No body, no trace, just silence. The road leading to the old hospital was half buried, but she had followed a tip about squatters in the ruins. It had turned out false, except for one thing: a trail of paw prints. They shouldn't have been there. Too large for a stray, too deep in the snow to be recent. Nora followed them with practiced steps, her hand resting near her holster, not from fear, but instinct. Then she saw it. Near the collapsed east wing of the hospital, beneath a broken fire escape and tangled chain-link fence, lay a figure curled into the snow. At first glance, it looked like debris, a pile of black cloth or a burnt coat. But then it moved barely, a slow, rising breath. Nora stepped closer, crouched, and what she saw stopped her heart cold. A German shepherd, large and powerful despite the frost biting through his thick, sable-black coat. His left hind leg was twisted unnaturally beneath him, and dried blood matted the fur along his flank. Snow clung to the grooves of his ribs, and his breathing was shallow but steady. His ears didn't lift, but his eyes opened, amber and intelligent. Not wild, not afraid, just watching. "Easy," Nora murmured, pulling off her gloves and lowering herself to one knee. "You're not just some stray, are you?" She reached for the old leather collar around his neck, cracked and nearly frozen solid. Beneath the ice, something was etched into the metal tag. "Unit 7 are classified." Her breath caught. "What the hell is a unit tag doing out here?" she whispered. The dog blinked once, slowly, then pressed his nose lightly into her palm. That small gesture, simple, quiet, cut through years of Nora's practiced attachment. She had seen this look before. In soldiers, survivors, victims. The eyes that didn't plead to be saved. They just needed to be understood. She wrapped him in her coat, cradled the weight of him against her chest, and began the slow trek back through the snow. 20 miles away, in the heart of Ash Grove town, Elliot Grant stirred his lukewarm coffee with a plastic spoon, eyes locked on the blinking waveform on his laptop. The cafe was dimly lit, its windows fogged from the cold outside. Elliot, 33, had the lean, restless look of someone who lived between truths. Unshaven, brown curls tucked under a wool cap, black hoodie draped under a denim jacket lined with shearling. His eyes, hazel and shadowed by fatigue, were always in motion, scanning the edges of the world like a man waiting for something only he could hear. He was a podcaster, the voice behind Dead Signal, a series devoted to unexplained disappearances, haunted places, and locations people don't return from. Ash Grove had drawn him like a moth. 2 nights ago, he'd recorded strange audio outside the hospital ruins. Long, static-laced pulses followed by what sounded like a child's whisper saying, "Below." Today, he planned to leave town. But then the waveform flickered again. And this time, it whispered something else. She's here. Elliot froze. Back at the sheriff's station, Nora laid the wounded dog gently onto a wool blanket inside the evidence room, warmer than the kennel. She dabbed antiseptic on his paw, wrapped the twisted leg, and gave him warm broth in a steel bowl. He didn't whimper, didn't flinch, just watched her, eyes never leaving her face. As she cleaned the collar more carefully, she noticed the second tag, worn down nearly to the metal, but barely legible beneath the scratches. Ashgrove, General Unit 7R. Unblair. Doutor Ekaujwell. Nora's hands went still. Her sister's name. For a moment, time collapsed. Wind howled against the windows like a scream from memory. The night Emily disappeared, she had left a voicemail saying she needed to talk. That she found something in the hospital records. Something off. Nora rose, unsteady. She looked at the dog. You were hers, she said quietly. He blinked once. No sound, but the air between them shifted. She turned off the lights, letting the room fall into shadow. And then she whispered, more to herself than anyone else, you didn't come to be rescued. You came to lead me back. The wind howled through the broken windows of Ashgrove General as twilight slipped into night, casting long shadows across the frost-laced bones of the old hospital. In the glow of the sheriff's station's hallway, Nora Caldwell stood silently, her coat still dusted with snow, her hands trembling as she reread the tag. Handler, Drive E. Caldwell. The dog, Ranger, she had started calling him, lay curled beneath the desk lamp, alert but still. His eyes followed her every step as if memorizing her movements. The bond between them had started to form in silence. Outside, the cold bit deeper. Frost crusted the patrol car windows. But Nora felt a heat behind her ribs, a pressure she hadn't felt in years. Not since the night Emily disappeared. She knew this wasn't coincidence. Something was pulling her toward Ashgrove General again, and the dog was part of it. At 7:14 p.m., the printer in the evidence room came to life. Nora turned sharply, expecting one of the deputies had triggered it. But no one else was there. She stepped closer. A single page lay in the tray. Yellowed paper, printed in a faint dot matrix style, as if spat out by a machine from decades past. The header read, Ashgrove General Hospital Patient Discharge Summary. Date, March 22nd, 1983. Name, Caldwell, Emily. Status, unresolved. Her breath caught in her throat. No one had ever found a hospital record under Emily's name. The system had been wiped. The original files burned. So how? Suddenly, Ranger growled. Low, deep, a sound not meant to intimidate, but to warn. Noraspon. His eyes were fixed on the south window. Beyond it, through drifting snow and dark tree limbs, she saw nothing. But the growl didn't stop. Instead, Ranger moved, limping at first, then trotting stiffly toward the door, his nose pressed against the glass. Something was out there, or beneath it. Half an hour later, Nora stood once more outside the skeletal remains of Ashgrove General. The wind had quieted, the snowfall soft. The building loomed dark, its windows shattered like hollow eyes. Ranger sniffed the earth, circling the collapsed east wing, ears twitching. Then he stopped beside a rusted drain pipe that disappeared into the ground. He began to dig. The snow gave way easily, revealing broken brick and old concrete. His paws clawed at something, a rectangular metal hatch, nearly swallowed by years of overgrowth. It was marked faintly in black stencil. Maintenance access, sublevel B. Nora leaned in, brushed off the dirt, and gave a tug. The hatch creaked open with a groan like a waking corpse. Below was only blackness. I'm not doing this alone, she muttered, pulling out her phone. She dialed the one person crazy enough to follow her into the dark. Elliot Grant hadn't been sleeping. He rarely did when working a case, but tonight he was jittery. His voice recorder, an old reel-to-reel he swore captured more honest sound, had picked up something new, a low frequency beneath the static. Almost human, almost mechanical. He'd been analyzing the tape when Nora called. He arrived 20 minutes later, breath fogging as he approached, wearing his usual winter kit, scuffed hiking boots, olive military parka, and his headphones still around his neck. He had the wiry build of a man always running from somewhere, and a gaze that flickered like candlelight when nervous. "Jesus," he said, peering into the dark pit beneath the hatch. "You sure about this?" Nora held up the collar tag. "That dog," she said, "was Emily's." Elliot blinked. "The missing sister?" Nora nodded. Ranger stood at the threshold of the hatch, tail stiff, nose tilted down. Without hesitation, he descended into the dark. The corridor beneath the hospital was narrow and wet. Concrete walls, warped with time and moisture, closed in tightly on either side. Their footsteps echoed, except Ranger's, whose padded gait was nearly silent. Flashlights flickered as they moved deeper. The hallway bent left, then right, then ended at a dead end. A slab of concrete wall, flat, featureless, until Elliot raised his light and saw it. A symbol, barely visible under the grime, a six-pointed star. No inscription, just geometry, etched with purpose, and a faint hum. "I've heard this before," Elliot said quietly. He pulled out his recorder, rewound the tape. Static, then a soft sound like a child's cry, then a low male voice repeating the word. "Selection, selection, selection." Nora froze. Emily had used that word in her last voicemail. She'd said, "They're running something. A selection process. It's not just medicine." Then silence. Back at the sheriff's station, Deputy Marla Voss, a stocky woman in her late 40s with short-cropped blonde hair and a suspicious squint, sorted through the day's logs. She didn't like mysteries and didn't like Nora much either. Too many closed-door files, too many solo investigations. Marla had been on dispatch duty when the fax machine lit up again. Another discharge sheet. This one labeled, "Patient ID 047 Grant, Elliot, status, evaluation pending." She stared. What the hell? Meanwhile, in the sub-basement, Elliot stepped closer to the wall. It's like something's powering up. The hum's getting stronger. Nora traced the edge of the star with her fingers. It felt warm. Then a breeze swept down the corridor. Impossible. There was no vent, no opening. And yet, it smelled sterile. Like alcohol. And ozone. Ranger stood suddenly. He moved to the far left corner of the corridor and began to paw again. Concrete crumbled beneath him. Slowly, a crack appeared. Nora helped pull the slabs loose. Behind it was a second tunnel, cramped, half-collapsed, but passable. Lights flickered deeper within. And down the path, just for a second, Nora saw a shadow move. Not a ghost, not a memory, something alive. The first dream came at 3:17 a.m. Nora Caldwell sat bolt upright in bed, drenched in sweat, her breath coming in sharp gasps. The room was silent, except for the soft ticking of a wall clock and the distant whir of the sheriff's station's generator cycling through the night. The faint smell of antiseptic still clung to her sleeves, residue from hours earlier when she and Elliot had descended into the forgotten halls of Ashgrove General. But it wasn't just a dream. It had been too real. She had walked a corridor lit by flickering white light. The walls were smooth, tiled like an operating theater. She had passed a row of glass rooms, each holding a figure strapped to a gurney, heads tilted back, mouths agape in silent screams. Men and women in white surgical masks stood above them, expressionless, needles in hand. One mask turned to her, and beneath it, she saw Emily's eyes. Beside her bed, Ranger stirred. The German shepherd, now wrapped in an old plaid blanket, lifted his head. His amber eyes met hers, and they weren't just alert. They were expectant, as if he too had seen. Nora's hand found his fur, trembling. "I think I was there," she whispered. Not just dreaming, remembering. At the same hour across town, Elliot Grant sat at the desk in his rented trailer, the warm glow of his monitor casting shadows against the aluminum walls. The audio file he'd been dissecting all evening had taken a new shape. It was no longer just static and voices. The waveform showed sudden bursts of ordered pulses, like Morse code. He was no coder, but he knew someone who could help. He dialed a number he hadn't used in 3 years. After 2 rings, a woman answered. Her voice was low, gruff, and unmistakably annoyed. What? Cassie Reese, late 20s, ex-AI systems engineer turned shortwave hacker, with a reputation for cracking encrypted hospital comms for sport. She lived off-grid somewhere in Idaho, rarely picked up unless it was strange enough to be worth her time. Cass, Elliot said, it's Elliot. I've got a signal from a decommissioned hospital in Montana. I think it's not just a recording. I think it's live, she said, sharp now. That's impossible. Is it? He challenged. A pause. Then, send it. The next night, Nora dreamed again. This time, she was inside a white room. The kind of room that swallows sound. A woman was restrained in a chair, her back to the camera. Doctors whispered behind glass. A red light blinked above the door. A voice echoed in the room. Begin phase 3. The woman lifted her head. Her profile was pale, bruised, and unmistakably familiar. Emily. But this time, she turned to look directly at Nora through the dream and mouthed, "They never stopped." Nora woke screaming. Ranger stood, already alert at the door. Later that morning, Nora and Elliot sat together in the evidence room, surrounded by printouts, torn maps, and 3-day-old coffee. She told him everything: the dreams, the room, Emily's eyes, the voice. Elliot rubbed his temple, clearly rattled. It's not random. Cassie confirmed the pulses. They're not echo. They're structured transmissions, possibly even live responses to interference. He pulled up a news clipping on his tablet. This article was scrubbed 2 months after the fire, he said, zooming in. It mentions a failed auditory neurological program funded by government subagency called Project Resound. The experiment's aim? Induce elevated neural states through low-frequency audio. Volunteers were promised cognitive enhancement. He passed the tablet to Nora. A redacted name sat at the bottom of the document. Subject 12, Caldwell, E. The air around them seemed to freeze. That night, they returned to the tunnel, armed with flood lamps, a ground scanner borrowed from the forestry unit, and enough skepticism to fill the Rockies. Nora and Elliot descended again, with Ranger leading, ever silent, ever sure. Halfway down the corridor, the scanner began to beep erratically. Beneath the concrete floor, something pulsed, slow, steady like a heartbeat. Elliot adjusted the gain, trying to locate the source. Then from deeper inside the sublevel, a voice. Not through the scanner. Not through the recorder. Spoken. Human. Hello. Nora raised her flashlight. Who's there? No answer. She pressed forward. Ranger stopped her with a low, drawn-out growl. Elliot's lamp caught the glint of metal ahead. A sliding steel door, partially ajar. On its surface, in fading red paint. Resound Ward. No entry beyond this point. Nora pushed it open. The room beyond was a time capsule. Monitors flickered weakly. Old analog machines hummed softly in standby. Along the wall were stacked medical files and binders, dust-laden and rotting at the spines. One binder lay open on a table. The nameplate inside read, K. Ryland, director of Phase 1. Nora whispered, I know that name. He signed Emily's internship authorization. A sound came from behind a curtain in the far corner. Not a footstep, not a voice. Breathing. The dawn mist hadn't yet lifted when Nora Caldwell pulled into the gravel driveway of a house that looked half swallowed by forest. Pines leaned close to the structure like curious sentinels, their limbs frosted with morning chill. A thin column of smoke curled from the chimney. The home, built of dark timber and stone, seemed older than the town itself. It was tucked at the edge of Ash Grove's northern boundary, where maps blurred into forgotten terrain. Nora stepped out, Ranger at her side, limping slightly but focused. She had come to find Sheriff Monroe Pike, the man who'd once held the badge she now wore. A legend in Caldera County, a towering figure with sharp instincts and a sharper temper. He'd retired under murky circumstances a decade ago, after an incident involving classified investigations and several vanishing witnesses. No one ever confirmed if it was a cover-up, but everyone in law enforcement knew not to bring up Ashgrove General in his presence. Nora knocked twice. The door opened to reveal a man who looked like he had been carved from the mountain itself. Monroe Pike, now in his early 60s, stood tall and broad-shouldered, with a thick white beard and deep creases around steel blue eyes. His hair, once jet black, was now mostly silver, swept back neatly. He wore a flannel shirt beneath a battered canvas vest, and there was something in the set of his jaw that still warned strangers to speak carefully. "Caldwell," he said, eyes briefly landing on the dog. "Figured this day might come." "I need to ask you about Ashgrove," Nora said simply. He stepped aside, letting her in. "Of course you do." The interior of Monroe's house was clean, sparse. A fire crackled in the hearth. On the mantel above it sat only one photo, a young girl in a wheelchair beside a smiling Monroe. She had his eyes. "That's Clara," he said, catching Nora's glance. "My daughter. Lost her hearing after that place." Nora turned. "After the hospital?" He nodded. "She was 6. Just a visitor. Caught in one of the early tests, before they even admitted they were running experiments." "Experiments like Project Resound?" she asked. His eyes narrowed. "What did you hear that name?" "We found a hidden level. Ward records. Equipment. Audiolux. It's not empty anymore." Monroe rubbed his chin, then walked to a file cabinet tucked behind a bookshelf. He pulled out a leather folder marked in faded gold. "Case 237, do not re-enter." "They made me bury this," he said. "Feds came in, boxed everything. Threatened me with federal obstruction if I so much as breathe a word to the press. But I kept one copy." He handed her a sheet. "Patient Incident Log, 1983. Notes. Subject demonstrated frequency sensitivity beyond tested limits. Entered seizure state at 47 Hz. Survived. Woke speaking fluent Russian. Never studied. Memory blackouts followed. Subject marked for reassignment." Nora flipped to the next page. A grainy photo of a girl strapped to a chair, eyes wide. Below it, a note in red ink. "Do not exceed threshold." Subjects adapting. Some of them weren't patients, Monroe said, voice tight. They were picked. Orphans. Undocumented. No paper trail. Easy to disappear. "Am I sister?" Nora asked. Monroe nodded slowly. She worked in records. Started asking questions. "I think she found a reassignment list." Then she vanished. Meanwhile, at the edge of Ashgrove Town, Elliot Grant sat hunched in the back of his trailer, headphones pressed tight, fingers dancing across dials. A static rhythm pulsed from the speakers. Low, consistent, mechanical. It had been playing for nearly 2 hours now. Except it wasn't just static. Beneath the pattern, a voice whispered in intervals. Female. Echoing. Deliberate. Return, realign, error. Trace lost. Elliot froze the recording and opened a waveform visualizer. The spikes weren't random. They formed coded beats, similar to emergency alert formats used by Cold War-era communication systems. He replayed the last sequence at half speed. Echo, error, echo, resound protocol breach. He grabbed his recorder, hit save, and pulled up a chat window to Cassie Reese. "EL, signal's still live. Sounds like cognitive feedback, but there's syntax. Almost like it's talking to itself. CR, we'll try to reach someone. EL, do AIs dream? CR, only when they forget who programmed them." Back at the ruins of Ashgrove, Ranger barked once and darted toward the north side of the structure. Nora followed, flashlight bouncing over twisted metal and splintered wood. The dog stopped at a rusted vent duct half buried beneath a collapsed stairwell. Nora pulled the debris away. Inside, wedged between 2 broken slats, was an old wooden crate, sealed with medical tape and scorched at the corners. She dragged it out, coughing through the dust. The smell of mildew and iron filled the air. She cracked it open. Inside were manila folders, hundreds of them. Patient records, all handwritten, all marked with red numerical codes instead of names. But the first folder had a tag. Patient 014, Caldwell, Emily. Nora dropped to her knees. She flipped through pages of notes. EEG scans, dosage logs, audio response tests. Subject exhibits rapid neuroplasticity under prolonged exposure. Sleep deprivation intensifies adaptive capabilities. Consider transfer to Resound Core. And then, memory separation initiated. Henla, Courant. Monroe stepped beside her, reading over her shoulder. They weren't healing anyone, he muttered. They were breaking them. At that same moment, a new signal buzzed through Elliot's headset. Louder, clearer. A new voice, male this time, rasping through the feed like sand scraping glass. Do not wake her. She remembers. She remembers. Then the signal died, the screen went black, and his recorder clicked off on its own. Ashgrove General stood like a forgotten cathedral beneath the bleeding moonlight. Snow spiraled gently from the sky, but there was no peace in it, only a deceptive stillness. The town slept uneasily, unaware that below its roots, something still pulsed, still waited. Nora Caldwell stood beside the gaping mouth of the access tunnel, flashlight in one hand, service weapon holstered on her hip. Her breath clouded in front of her, but her expression was sharp, fixed. She wore a black tactical coat over a thermal shirt and jeans, dusted in ash and snow. Next to her stood Elliot Grant, his lean frame wrapped in an old military parka, eyes alert beneath the brim of his knit cap. His voice recorder hung around his neck, powered off but ready. At their feet, Ranger stood still, tail stiff, ears pointed forward into the black. The German shepherd was no longer limping. He had moved with clarity, purpose, since the moment they'd opened Emily Caldwell's file. The dog, though gray at the muzzle and scarred along the ribs, seemed reborn under the moonlight. He wasn't just a remnant of someone's past. He was now the key. They descended together. The corridor greeted them like a memory. The smell of rust and sterile decay, the hum that lived beneath the concrete, almost like a distant engine or a heartbeat. Their lights swept over peeling paint and warped signage. This time, they didn't stop at the resound ward. They followed Ranger deeper. Through a sealed steel door, pried open with a crowbar Monroe had loaned them. Past another lab chamber, empty except for overturned chairs and shattered glass. Until finally, the path widened into a vault. A single room, vast and low-ceilinged. At the far wall stood a sound isolation chamber, its thick glass coated in frost, the interior dark. To its left, a machine, tall and humming, with wires fed deep into the wall like vines. On a small, embedded screen, audio log number 3437. Subject, Caldwell, Emily. Timestamp, 11:42 p.m. The play button blinked. Nora stepped forward, hand shaking slightly. She pressed it, at first only static, then her sister's voice. Soft, weak. I'm still here. Elliot turned pale. That's not a recording. That was processed in real time. That timestamp is from tonight. Nora stared at the chamber window. Then she turned to the control panel, began flipping switches. Behind the glass, dim lights flickered on. There, amid frost, wires, and silence, was a woman suspended in cryonic stasis. Floating slightly, body relaxed but unmoving. Tubes fed into her veins. A metal crown of electrodes wrapped her skull. Her features were unmistakable, even through the haze. Emily. She looked no older than the day she vanished. Ranger growled, not fearfully, but urgently. He stepped toward the glass, tail raised, body tense. His gaze was locked on something behind the chamber, beyond the wall. Elliot checked the scanner on his hip. It's spiking, he muttered. There's something neural, electrical, brain activity. But that's impossible, Nora said, her voice cracking. Or it's exactly what Project Resound was built for, he replied. Isolated cognitive survival. Maybe they used her as a seed. A host interface. That signal we've been tracing? It's hers. She's the transmitter. The realization struck like ice water. The sound, the whispers, the dreams. They weren't echoes of trauma. They were messages. Emily had been reaching out, and someone, or something, had kept her trapped. From the far end of the room, a figure stirred. A shadow stepped out from behind an old equipment cabinet. Tall, gaunt, draped in a dark lab coat that brushed the floor. His face was pale, angular, stretched with time. His hair was thin and white, combed straight back. One eye was covered with a milky lens, the other sharp and burning with cold awareness. Dr. Kenneth Ryland, former lead neurologist of Project Resound. She's not your sister anymore, he said, voice like dust on metal. She's a conduit. Her mind holds the protocols, the fail-safes, the final instructions. She was chosen because of her capacity to listen, to adapt. She's the last functioning unit of the program. Nora raised her weapon. Step away. Ryland didn't flinch. Do you think unplugging her would set her free? He asked. Her consciousness has fractured across 3 layers of neural mapping. The moment she wakes, the system collapses. Good, Elliot said quietly. Ryland turned toward him. You have no idea what she's carrying. What she became. The facility was meant to preserve, not punish. You came here chasing ghosts. But ghosts are echoes. Emily is still alive, and she's been trying to warn you. Ranger lunged without warning, snarling, teeth bared. Ryland stumbled back, knocking over the console. The screen blinked. Emergency override engaged. The chamber hissed. Alarms triggered. Red lights pulsed along the ceiling. The temperature in the room dropped sharply. Vents blasted cold vapor as systems began powering down. Nora ran to the control panel. She had 2 options: abort and destroy, a single button marked in red, which would shut down the facility permanently, initiating a cryogenic purge, or stabilize and isolate, a command that would preserve Emily's suspended state, leaving the connection intact. Think, Elliot said. If we save her body, we save them. If we end it, maybe she's free. Nora's hand hovered above the console. Ranger stood rigid, watching her. His ears were down, his eyes locked on her face. He didn't move, and somehow she understood. Emily had never asked to be saved. She had only asked to be heard. Nora pressed the red button. The lights dimmed. The chamber's frost bloomed over the glass. The machine let out a long, final whine, and then silence. Emily's voice did not return, but the humming stopped. The signal ceased. The echoes fell away. And for the first time since that night 25 years ago, Nora Caldwell stopped hearing her sister in the dark. Ash Grove burned quietly under the snow. The flames hadn't roared, they hissed. The detonation Nora Caldwell had set was surgical, buried in the lowest level of the old hospital, placed beneath the primary generators and communication relays. When the charges went off at 2:11 a.m., there was a deep shudder beneath the ground, a bloom of orange light beneath the frost, and then the entire substructure of Ash Grove General collapsed inward like a mouth finally closing around its secret. Nora stood on the ridge just north of the site, wind snapping at her coat. She didn't blink, didn't cry. Her sister's body, what remained, lay beneath a white tarp in the back of her cruiser, shielded from the smoke and cold. The signal was gone. No more whispers. No more dreams. Beside her, Ranger sat calmly, eyes fixed on the sky, ears still. He was utterly quiet, but his posture had changed. Gone was the tension, the ever-readiness. His body was still strong, but his eyes had softened, as if the fight that had carried him all these years had finally eased. Nora didn't know if he was resting or preparing to leave her. She just knew something in him had shifted. Then her phone buzzed. Elliot Grant, sitting in the back of his trailer across town, sent a message. Got something. Code from the machine, survived 2 seconds post-detonation. One phrase. Guardian 7 are active. Transfer complete. Then silence. Nora stared at the words. She looked at Ranger, who stared back at her. And for the first time in weeks, she whispered, "What did you do?" Later that morning, snow fell lazily on her cabin just beyond Ash Grove's border, a place of solitude and repair built of pale cedar and flanked by thick spruce trees. The wind had calmed. Smoke curled from the chimney. Inside, Nora had laid Emily's body on a bench, wrapped in a blanket. She sat beside her for hours, unmoving, Ranger at her feet. Elliot came by around noon, bringing fresh coffee and a long, silent embrace. He said little, only handed her a thumb drive. All I could pull before the system went. I think it's what she wanted you to know. Nora took it, but didn't open it. That night, the wind returned. But this time it didn't howl. It carried something softer. At 3:03 a.m., Ranger rose from his blanket by the hearth and walked to the front door. He didn't bark. He didn't whine. He just sat, rigid and waiting. Nora blinked awake, still curled on the floor near the fire. The silence was thick. Then came a sound. A single bark, sharp and clear from outside the door. Not Ranger. Smaller. Higher. She stood slowly, heart caught in her throat, and opened the door. There in the snow stood a puppy, no more than 4 months old. A German shepherd with black and tan fur, lighter in pattern than Ranger's, but unmistakably similar. Its ears were too big for its head. Its eyes were round, glowing amber. It was wagging its tail, tongue lolling to one side, snowflakes dusting its snout. But it wasn't the appearance that stunned her. It was the collar, a small leather band, clearly too large for the pup, yet carefully fastened. On the tag, Emily Caldwell. Nora knelt in the snow, hands trembling, mouth open, but no sound escaping. The pup stepped forward, gently pressing its forehead to her knee. Inside the house, Ranger stood silently, tail still, watching them from the doorway. The next day, Elliot helped Nora bury Emily's body beneath the old white pine tree near her cabin. The ground was softening now, spring beginning to stir beneath the snow. No formal ceremony, just silence, closure. Above the grave, Nora placed a small wooden plaque etched by hand. She was heard. Ranger sat beside the grave for hours, and when the sun dipped low, he stood, walked to the porch where the puppy now napped curled against Nora's boots, and lay down next to her. The two dogs, old and new, touching only at the tips of their paws. Elliot stayed that night. He'd been sleeping better lately. He even smiled. He had started journaling again, though this time, not as a podcast to chasing ghosts, but as a man remembering what it meant to be human. As they watched the fire, he looked at Nora and asked quietly, "Do you think she came back?" Nora didn't answer right away. She watched the pup lift its head and bark once, sharp and joyful, toward the window where snow continued to fall. Then she said, "I think she was never really gone. Sometimes, the ones we've lost are never truly gone. They speak through echoes, through memory, through the quiet loyalty of those who stand by us, even in silence." This story wasn't just about a sister or a dog or a hidden lab beneath a ruined hospital. It was about the unseen bonds that carry us forward, about how love, once rooted deep, never dies, it transforms. In our daily lives, we often overlook the whispers, a moment of intuition, a flicker of memory, a sudden sense that we are not alone. But maybe, just maybe, those are the voices of those still walking beside us in unseen ways. So love fiercely, listen deeply, and never forget that even the smallest bark in the night may be a reminder we were heard. If this story moved you, please consider sharing it, subscribing to the channel, and leaving a comment about